Okay, good morning, everyone. We are going to get started. My name is Erica Morin, and I'm the Manager of Training and Member Services here at MSIC. We are delighted to have with us today attorneys Stan Ragalevsky and Rob Tamero of K&L Gates, and they are here to speak with us about board evaluation and succession planning and how to structure those functions. Before we begin, please note that there will be time for a brief Q&A at the conclusion of today's presentation. So please feel free to ask your questions during the webinar at any time, and we will get to them once Stan and Rob wrap up. You can send your questions via the Q&A or the chat box found at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. We have a lot of content to cover today, so I am going to go ahead and hand this right over to Stan and Rob so they can get started.
Well, thank you, Erica. I think you all know that management succession is a topic that you regularly discuss at your board meetings of your credit union. Director succession, however, is a topic that is less frequently covered, and there's probably two reasons for this. One is the directors don't like to want to give themselves a little bit of an exemption from the same accountability rules they expect on from the management. That's a natural tendency. It always seems that the accountability stops at one level below the person who's seeking the accounting. And the other reason, of course, that this is board succession planning is a difficult issue is that the CEOs often do this at their peril. It's very difficult where the CEO works for the board. The CEO is not in a very good position to evaluate the board or push for changes in the board without a certain amount of risk. We've tried to put together a really good program for you folks today, and we will try to show you, educate you a bit about board succession planning, board evaluations, and board development. We've got two pieces of information for you today. One is we've got a PowerPoint presentation that kind of summarizes board evaluation and succession. There's about 40 slides in that handout. Erica will be distributing this to you after sometime today or tomorrow after the program is over. And then the other thing we have an appendix of about 50 pages with some forms that we think we'll find very valuable. Erica, if you could put up just the index, the first the cover sheet for the appendix. Yeah, okay. You see, we have 12 forms here that will actually help you take some of the ideas that we'll be discussing today and implement them at your credit union if that is how you decide to proceed. Some of the forms have watermarks that they're specimens, and we're not trying to tell you that you absolutely have to do something that may be in one of these forms at all. I think that we have the attitude that it's easier to remove things than it is to add things in there. So if there are certain things that you don't think work for your credit union, feel free to take them, to delete them. If you want any of these forms in Word so that you can change or manipulate it and change it, at your own credit union, then you can contact Erica because we'll be providing those forms to her in a Word format so that you will have the ability to do that. Let me start now, Erica. We can go back to the PowerPoint to slide 2, and I'm going to say a few words on exactly what is board. What are we talking about when we say board succession? We're really talking about three things: board evaluation, board planning for succession at the board level among the directors, and then board development in terms of making the people who are on the board better or recruiting new people to the board who might be suitable members of the board. And there's really, I guess, 4 parts to a process, a board evaluation and succession process. You have to start out with the idea. The starting point is to understand what are you looking for in terms of what competencies do you think you need on your, on the board. Then you have to do an assessment of the directors to determine whether you have those competencies, and if not, where are the gaps, and try to then go one step further. You can, third part of this is to try to come up with a process to improve and educate your directors so that they can, they can fill in some of those gaps if you have gaps, or if not, that you are then can recruit people to the board who will add something to the existing mix of people that you already have on the board. You can go to slide 5, Erica. Okay. Now, board succession is a particularly difficult issue for credit unions because of mandatory retirement ages in the bylaws are something that I know the State Division of Banks frowns on. They take a position that all credit union members should have equal rights in the credit union, so that if you're telling someone that they can't sit on the board after they turn age 72, for example, the Division of Banks has a problem, with that. And I'll get into that in a minute, why that becomes a difficult issue, really, because when you take a look at the board succession planning, as I said before, it can be something of a third rail for the for the CEO, and it's a topic that is often lightly touched on, and that's unfortunate. So financial institutions, whether they be banks or credit unions, generally they either have a proactive approach to board succession planning or a reactive approach. And the reactive approach is much more common than the proactive approach. And the reactive approach is basically a mandatory retirement age. And the reason why people like a mandatory retirement age, it's simple, everyone understands it. It's predictable. You know when someone's going to be termed off the board, and it can be applied. It's applied to everyone without any favoritism, and so it creates less opportunity for discord and conflict within the board. And so I think you will find that that mandatory retirement age is the primary way that most financial institutions address the question of board succession. That doesn't all, that really doesn't make an awful lot of sense. You're much better off, if we go to slide 9, Erica, and you want to, you're much better off, having an ongoing process to assess, who's on the board. Do you have the right skills? Are they aligned? Are the people on the board aligned with the strategic direction of the credit union? And having ongoing process where you consider that periodically, whether it be doesn't have to be once a meeting, certainly, and it can be once a year. But taking the hard assessment, a look at the board, and have a process in place to have the board basically assess itself. Is it doing the job? Is it doing the job? Are the directors who are on the board, fulfilling their responsibilities too? And to institutionalize that in the process is what I guess you'd call it proactive succession planning. It's not intended, by the way, to be punitive or to get people. It's just really an opportunity for you to define what you want. What does the credit union want? Define the skills that are needed, and whether and assess what you have. Assess what you have and how you might be able to improve that if improvement is suggested. It's you go to slide 12. There's a great quote on slide 12 at the bottom here, and one thing that see, let's second. The second, as you can see, the second bullet here, that the concept of directorship is to serve, not to serve as long as you want to, it is to serve as long as you need it. And that is something that often gets lost in the mix with the culture of most of most boards. People generally don't like the idea of being termed off the board and the like, but it really is, it's not punitive. It's not intended to be punitive, but you need to have a certain amount of change on a board, because the key issues that a credit union may have faced 10 years ago are not those same issues today. Or they, some of them may be the same, but there's going to be a certain amount of variation and difference that would suggest that it really is necessary to have some periodic turnover on the board, so that the institution can change with the time, with the times as well. In my experience, there's nothing sad to see a financial institution, or credit union, or a bank where everyone on the board, they all came on the board, and they're in their 40s, and they're now all in their late 70s, are all in the late 70s, and they're all going to have to retire at the same time. They haven't paid any attention to adjusting the priorities of the credit union, and they have no alternatives. The only good alternative they have is perhaps to merge the credit union with a larger credit union, and that's generally an unhappy ending, for everyone. I'm going to turn it over now to Rob, who's going to tell you a little bit about the board succession process. Slide 13, Erica, next slide. And Rob, you want to say a few words about starting out with getting board buy-in, which is the first part of all this.
Sure. Thanks, Stan. As Stan mentioned, ideally this board succession is process-driven. It's not reactive. It's something that is done on a proactive basis. And in terms of it being process-driven, we've broken it down into various steps. So if the first step is, as is the case with any set of changes in an organization wants to implement, is to get buy-in. And so step one is to discuss the need or the desire for a process-driven approach to board succession, and to get the board members on board with doing that. And I think that doing that is not only necessary because it prevents factions or holdouts from this approach, but it also can empower individual board members to have ownership in developing a succession process that's robust and methodical and ongoing. And that's really, I think, the goal, to have this be something that a board is always in some stage of.
Yeah, you can't really go too fast on this. Whoever's leading the effort can't be too far out in front of the board as a whole. And if you are going too fast, the effort might not be successful. But that's requires the chairman or whoever is leading the process to make that determination based on his knowledge and understanding of the members of the board.
And to that point, what we have here is step two, is to pick a leader. So with any process that takes time or that's intended to be ongoing, it's important that there be a leader or a group of leaders who make sure that the board remains accountable to the cause of implementing a succession plan, and follows through on the decision made at the outset that a board is going to engage in this type of process. As Stan said at the beginning of the program, the CEO of the organization often isn't in the best position to drive this process. And so a natural leader to help drive the succession process at the board level is often the board chair or the governance committee. Next step, step 3, define strategies and needed board skills. And I think that this is really critical. I would view board succession as going hand in glove with defining the strategic priorities and direction of the credit union. You can't assess what skills on the board you don't have today and will need tomorrow without a clear understanding of where the credit union is going or is intended to go tomorrow. So defining the strategies, understanding what skills and competencies will be needed at the board level to execute those strategies is a critical step in determining then who the board needs to think about recruiting from a skills and competencies and experience perspective as part of the succession process.
Erica, if you could put up Annex 4 from the forms.
Annex 4 is a director position description, and it is intended to help boards think through the attributes and experiences and expertise, areas of expertise that directors might have or that a credit union board might have deficiencies in and may, for that reason, be looking for new directors to come in and fill and to be able to provide needed or missing skills and competencies. And this Exhibit 4, is sort of in a checklist style that allows a board to list its directors and to rate the existing directors' skills and experience in certain areas. And that can be mapped to the other part of the exhibit, which refers to the director's years of service and term expiration and expected retirement, to determine and be able to visualize when the board will see certain key areas of experience terming off the board, and therefore have a better understanding of when and what expertise the board will need to bring on.
Yeah, the position description is really an important starting point. And you'd be surprised how many financial institutions don't have a director position description. This form that we're showing you now is something that we've put together over the years, and it's more, it's a bit theoretical. It's a bit theoretical, at least in terms of outlining the overall responsibilities that you expect, not only from individual directors, from the board as a whole. What competencies should the board possess as a whole, and does it have? And the whole idea here is to take some time and give you a product that will be useful to you as you go through your own process to determine, who's on the board and whether they're doing they are sufficiently accountable. So, but once you get an understanding as to what are the requirements or the expectations for directors as a general proposition, you are then ready to move on to the next step, which is conducting an assessment, a skills assessment. It's not I wouldn't say that it's an evaluation. It's really a skills assessment of the people that you already have on the board. Talk about that.
Yeah, we have in the materials a few different forms of assessment that are intended to show and be useful in a range of scenarios. So we have an individual self-evaluation form where directors would evaluate themselves, their own performance, their own skills, experience. Peer evaluation, which is not necessarily frequently used, but can be helpful if there's question about significant dysfunction on the board level, at the board, where directors might be asked to evaluate one another. And then we also have a form where directors are asked to rate or comment on the board's effectiveness as a whole. And these might be useful and appropriate individually in different types of scenarios.
Yeah, let me say a couple more words, Rob, on the on the forms. There are annexes 5, 6, 7, and 8, and Annex 5 is based on one that I liked. It's a very comprehensive assessment. It was done by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, actually. Put that out a number of years ago. But they ask the right questions, and it's been edited for a credit union. It's edited for a credit union. It's not particularly offensive. I don't think directors are going to find it offensive. But it's a general assessment of the person, the individual director's assessment of whether he or she is making a valuable contribution, and what he or she thinks about the way the board is functioning and what could be done better. The next form, Form 6, is one that we have, Rob and I have put together over the years. And here we've modified this over the years, and this is really designed to elicit more information, because it asks for comments basically on a whole bunch of different topics, and that feedback that you would get would be very, very valuable in that. And that's my personal favorite. If you go to the next form, section 7, Annex 7. This is the one-page form, and this is, I call this the nuclear form. And this is a format that's what they call a peer-to-peer evaluation. So not only do directors assess themselves, they also assess each fellow member of the board. So if you have 8 directors, each director gets 8 copies of this form. They fill one out on themselves, and they fill one out on each of the other directors. And this form is valuable in the context of you're dealing with a situation where you have a toxic director, someone who really shouldn't be on the board, and everyone else on the board except that director is in agreement, with that. You use a form like this. Larger public companies use forms like this to identify unsuitable directors, and the way this is generally done is that each director fills out a form on each fellow director. If it turns out that one director dislikes one of the other directors, that's not reported to anyone. The forms are generally read by someone who is absolutely trusted. It can be the chairman of the board. It can be the executive assistant to the CEO, who has been at the credit union for 30 years and has the complete trust of everyone. They read the forms, and then they report to the chairman and say, well, there were 1 or 2 people. One person didn't like a particular director. But if you have a situation where you've got like 5 people saying that, 5 directors saying that one of the directors is unsuitable, then that gets dumped on the lap of the chairman of the board, and the chairman has to deal with that. Generally, the forms are taken and they're ripped up and destroyed after the assessment is done. After the assessment is done to it, and you need to maintain absolute confidentiality over all of this stuff if you can. So you have to take steps to do that. But generally, if most of the directors think that a particular director isn't carrying his or her weight, or isn't prepared, or he irritates them because he doesn't show up for meetings and all, then the chairman has to go to that director and say, your fellow directors as a group basically think you're not carrying your own weight. A good person will probably listen to that and say, I think I better resign. A bad person might get hostile, might get somewhat hostile in terms of their reaction, to it. But that's why that's why having enough, a tough chairman that everyone respects is so important to making any kind of director succession planning process work well. Let's see here. Okay. Okay. So anyway, so after you actually fill out the form, so the last form I think about, by the way, was Form 8, or Annex 8, and that is this is a general, how do you think the board is working? It's not, it doesn't really, it doesn't probe a lot, but for a starting point, this form might be a good starting point if you don't feel that it would be productive to use forms 5 or 6, one of the 5 or 6. If those forms are not, do not work, or you think would cause too much controversy, start with Form Annex 8, and then the next year you can decide whether you want to ratchet up the process a little bit, make it a little bit more informative in terms of the information and the data that you get out of it. So after you do that, the next thing is to create a matrix. Rob, you want to talk a little bit about the matrix, which is Annex 2. Erica, if we could go to that.
Right, right, and I alluded to this earlier. So this is where we have, it's a 2-page form where individual directors are listed in one column, and then information about each director is listed in subsequent columns. And it's intended to help the board as a whole visualize the skills and experience that is currently on the board, and as well as when that experience is likely to leave the board on account of directors retiring or rotating off. And so it's intended as a map and to help boards think through what they have currently on the board, what they may be missing, and when they may when they can expect to have deficiencies in certain areas. And just for example, we have among the columns are particular areas of expertise where individual directors would be rated as having significant or lesser experience in a certain area, lending, for example. And so this tool might be useful if, for example, you're looking at a situation where all of your directors who are identified as being strong and knowledgeable in the area of lending happen to also be at or nearing the time when they're going to no longer serve on the board. That's a clear indication that the board needs to think in terms of succession about identifying candidates and bringing on candidates who might have that particular experience, or failing that, trying to find education and training opportunities for other directors who might have an inclination in that area and could be brought up to speed so that the board doesn't find itself with a hole in that area of experience or understanding when those directors rotate off.
Erica, if you go to the next page on this Annex 2, that we have the attributes up, but here's, you can see we have the skills and knowledge base too, to take the important areas to have some representation on the board here. We have a very simple rating system here. We're not going to you just say strong, someone who's really is if you had a person who is a real estate broker and understands lending home values and the like, you would expect them to have a strong capability in that area. A number of directors will have a basic understanding of things like, topics like liquidity, but they're not going to be they're not CPAs. A CPA might have a strong understanding of that, but I know a regular director probably without that background would not, should have a basic understanding of it. And then the third, number three, or three rating is relies on other members. That means someone who's along for the ride, who isn't really, isn't likely to, has no particular background or demonstrated interest in a particular topic. And what you really want is you want to have a mix. So at the end of the day, that you have, a couple of people might have a lot of financial acumen. Other people might have expertise in IT or lending, leadership skills, community involvement. This gives you a pretty good picture of what you got on the, what you've got on the board, and I think it's a very valuable tool for you folks to consider instituting at your credit union if you don't do something like this. The Annex 1 is this form without anything filled in on it, so that we try to design it that way so that you would be able to find this useful. You don't have to deal with having someone who's got the expertise and putting together one of these from a word processing point of view that it, hopefully to save you time and money. And you can do your own census and fill in and do your own ratings. And specimen Annex 2 is just a specimen to show you how to do that. Rob, I think you talked about the gap analysis, so we can.
Yeah, we talked about a gap analysis. I guess I might just add, in terms of if you were to use this this matrix, I think it's important to have all of the traditional areas that key areas of expertise, but it also has to be looked at in combination with the credit union strategic plan, because you need to think about who's on the board today and what's the strategic direction, and will we have the right directors to understand and guide the institution towards what's been identified as the strategic direction of the credit union, which is, I think, as important, more important than ever, given the just explosion in competition in the financial services area.
That's so important, Rob, that knowing what you want, getting a good handle on what you want. There's so many times I've seen over the years where someone retires from the board of directors sits down, it's like a thunderbolt hit them. Fred is no longer, is going to be retiring from the board in 4 months. What do we do about it? And if you don't have a process, what you end up with is each director, may think about someone that they want to propose as a source. Very often, some of the candidates about half of them are unsuitable because they're relatives or they're close personal friends of someone who's on the, an incumbent director, which very often is not in the best interest of the organization as a whole to have people like that on the board, and they don't have an ability in that situation. Or they're getting someone. He's a good guy. He's he's lived in the community for a long time. And that's sort of about the extent of the due diligence that they and the thought that goes into. Well, what can we do if we need someone who has a background in IT? How can we find that? It's gotten a lot more difficult actually to find good directors, because 10 to 12 years ago, you had a lot of potential candidates. Now, people are scared because of the intrusiveness of particularly a federal supervision over all financial institutions. A lot of people don't really want to serve on a board. They're not particularly interested in serving on a board, and maybe you're going to have to coax them. They're not going to come to you. You're going to have to go to them. And to do it right, you need to have a process in place along the lines that we're suggesting to you this morning. So anyway, Rob, you want to say something about recruiting now? And
Right. So we have in Annex 12, the last item in the packet, procedures for identifying and evaluating candidates for directors, which is a document that contains a set of principles that are intended to help guide a nominating committee in identifying and evaluating candidates to come onto the board as part of the succession process. And it refers to things like, the various attributes and character and independence and experience and knowledge of financial services. But it's again intended to make the process of identifying and recruiting more process-driven, more objective, less about just defaulting to picking someone that someone may know or have an affinity for, but really help set forth a rubric for identifying candidates who fill the need and are really going to be able to contribute to the board and the direction of the credit union.
yeah, having written standards is so important in that in that regard, because you don't really, if you're on the board, how are you going to deal with a situation if you've got a very effective and strong chairman, but that chairman has a blind spot for his son-in-law and thinks, well, my son-in-law would be a suitable candidate to replace one of our retiring directors, and no one has if you really want to object to that, if you have a set of written standards, it's a lot easier to do that than if you don't, because if you don't, it ends up becoming personalized. And you don't like, you've never liked me, and so my son-in-law is would be a terrific person. He's got an MBA from the Wharton School. He'd be an outstanding candidate. That all may be true. That all may be true, but he may not be a suitable candidate. But if you don't have any written standards in place that everyone has agreed to, free of any particular particular candidate whose candidacy might be on the table at the time, it makes it very difficult for someone to basically hijack the whole process and just say, we're going to do it my way. If you've got some written standards, then it's much easier to apply those standards without having personalizing it and having a divisive argument. So recruiting, let's see, we're talking about, what you don't want. Well, anyway, I guess if we go to slide 28, Erica. Yeah, okay. Actually, maybe we should go back one. So anyway, we're talking about out here on slide 27 and 28 are when you're recruiting people, you identify those people. We've talked quite a bit about having the standard, having some standards and some, what are the criteria, the short list of criteria that you have, and you have to know what you want, what you want and what you don't, don't want. Obviously, character, personality, knowledge of financial services is certainly, should be required for all candidates, and knowing what you don't want. Again, having a process will help you in that regard. Now let's go to slide 29, Erica. We'll talk a little bit about the due diligence. And this is an area where I've seen over the years people fall down, credit unions and banks fall down because they don't do enough due diligence on people that they are looking to bring onto the board in terms of, a real personal background. Instead of it can't be just on the basis of an oral representation. I pay my bills. I pay my bills on time. I'm not a deadbeat. and I have reference, and you want to check references, you want to check employment history, you want to, and some places will use an investigator actually to check out the detail, to check out the details, because the problem is that if you bring on someone onto your board and that person, has got, criminal convictions is the worst, is the worst. It's the worst thing that you can do, because that is just so ugly to have to deal with that, and it stains everyone affiliated with the institution. So you really want to have a thorough due diligence process. A lot of financial institutions, I don't know if the NCUA uses this, but there's an interagency biographical form that the bank regulatory agencies, I don't know if the NCUA has signed on to it. That's actually a great vetting tool to ask people about their, about their background. Provides a lot of useful information, in terms of just going through that due diligence process. So, well, once you've got to finding, identifying, and maybe onboarding a director, the next part of the process of director succession is you need to have an ongoing process in place to make sure that your incumbent directors continue to be educated and spend some time staying abreast on developments that are of importance to the credit union, and that you bring on your new directors and expose them to the same level of of background training, training. We've got a Annex 10 is a pretty good policy on that, and I think that this is a policy that you probably won't see too many other places, places. It tries to identify how directors will be oriented onto the board, and the ongoing ability of directors to improve their skills, either by whether the credit union will pay for them to go to a conference. There's a whole process in place there in terms of the expectations for directors to improve their knowledge and understanding of the credit union industry, and I think it may not be totally suitable to the way your credit union operates, or particularly given its size. It's easier to have a policy like this if you have a larger credit, if you have a larger credit union than a smaller credit union. But I think that it's easy to slim this down to make it suit whatever the situation of your particular credit union is. So and that's a good policy. We also have a board succession policy, which I think is Exhibit 9, Annex 9, and this is something that we would recommend to you to take a good hard look at, because it's a fairly comprehensive policy. Some things might not be relevant to your credit union. Things like if you don't have director term limits, and the truth of the matter is that most financial institutions, whether they be banks or credit unions, do not have director term limits. They usually have age restrictions, and as I said, with a credit union, age restrictions are difficult if they are in the bylaws. I don't think there's a problem if a credit union says that we're not going to renominate someone who has reached a mandatory retirement age. That might be acceptable to the to the Division of Banks. I don't know the answer to that. I can't tell you the answer to that question, at this point in time. But this board succession policy is actually, I think, a very good document, and one that we would recommend that you take a good hard look at, because I think you'll find it, valuable. And then let's see let's go over to slide 33, Erica. We're going to talk a little bit about whether you are are there any signs that your board really needs to do something about board succession? And we'll talk about some board dysfunction red flags too. But in terms of practices indicative of a need for board succession, if these are I'd say if you have three of the 8 things I'm going to run, 7 things I'm going to run through here. If 3 of them apply to your credit union, then you're probably overdue for a good hard assessment of your board succession practices. And the first one is if you don't have a position description for the qualifications and responsibilities of directors, you can't, you won't be able to measure it if there's nothing to measure it against. And if you haven't added any new directors in 5 years, you tend to get a little bit hidebound. If you find out that half of your directors are retired or are planning to retire within the next 3 or 4 years, that's obviously a source of concern that you need, that a good organization will start to pay attention to that. Go over to the next slide, Erica. If you've never done a board assessment and you don't annually assess the board, the process doesn't have to be that elaborate. It's more important that you just have a process, and then if the credit union doesn't provide any continuing education and doesn't expect or require its directors to participate in whatever continuing education activities it authorizes for its directors. And then the last one is that once on the board, it's the feet first retirement plan, I like to say, where it's the directors go out feet first. They don't, everyone gets renominated. All the incumbents always get renominated, whether they deserve it or not. Like I said, if you have 3 or 4 of those things apply to your credit union, you may want to think about whether doing something to improve your board succession planning processes. And Rob's going to say a little bit about board dysfunction and red flags, because again, it's ultimately comes down to it's very hard to deal with instituting a good board succession planning process if you've got a lot of dysfunction on the board. The board really doesn't work, and no one really wants to touch it because the CEO basically reports to the board. So how can he tell them how it's going to be changed, how the board needs to change itself? So and that level of dysfunction generally grows until there's some kind of an eruption or an unfortunate event that brings everything to a head. So.
If we go to slide 35, some red flags on board dysfunction, and the problem with fundamentally the problem with dysfunction is that it's a distraction. If the board's dysfunctional, if the board is not working together, that means it's not focused on carrying out its important function of guiding the credit union. And so it's important to identify when the board might be having some form of dysfunction so that can be addressed appropriately and put in a better direction. So what are some signs that we've seen of boards that are dysfunctional or might be dysfunctional? Meetings that last way too long, a general lack of focus, meetings being sort of wandering and undisciplined in terms of their focus. Micromanagement is an important one to focus on. We see this a fair amount with financial institutions and boards that aren't working as effectively as they might be. Board members getting overly focused on management issues or particular operational issues, and trying board members becoming involved individually in particular operational issues. This is something that is can be really distracting and create significant discord with management and sort of take the institution off track, and can sort of bollocks up the institution so that it's unable to move forward, execute on its strategic plan. And then, as in any organization, an overly negative point of view by multiple directors frequently is something that is obviously a sign of dysfunction. Factions and us versus them mentality, and you see this sometimes. Hopefully not too often, but sometimes following mergers, you have sort of the on the board, the camp from one institution and then the camp from the other. That really makes it difficult or impossible to put the two organizations together in a successful way. Accountability not being taken seriously, sort of an entitlement to renomination and to being on the board, and then a general sort of lack of respect between the board and management is obviously another significant red flag.
Well, I'll make one final comment, and then we're going to throw it open to questions. And that is that if you really want to have an effective board succession planning process, it all starts with having an effective chairman who can lead that process. And if you've got a good chairman, it's up to the chair to really take this issue by the horns and drive it through the board, and get the directors to participate, agree that this is something that needs to be done, and provide the necessary leadership. Remember, it all comes down to the credit union comes first. The credit union comes first, and the credit union's needs are more important than the needs of any particular individual director. And the only person who's in a good position to make sure that happens is the chairman. And you need to have an effective chairman of the board. How you do that, of course, is a very difficult. It can be very difficult with credit unions have different practices. Some have rotating chairs. Others have chairs that may serve for an extended period of time. They're all over the lot. You have to figure out what works. There's none of those structures are automatically disqualifying. Would be automatically disqualifying, in my opinion. But it's but board leadership is certainly the sine qua non of having an effective board succession process. And with that, I think, Erica, if you've got any questions for us, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Stan and Rob. We did have some questions come in during the presentation, so I'll get right to those. The first one was, and I think you might have covered some of it with the dysfunction and red flags, but what are common succession planning mistakes that credit unions make?
I think, well, one of them is trying to get the right balance. Everything is always about the balance. And if you've got a dysfunctional situation, you're going to have to push a little bit hard. Someone on the board is going to have to push a little harder. Maybe it's going to make some of the directors feel uncomfortable. But as a whole, the board has to feel that these succession planning efforts, a process that the chair or the leadership of the board wants to put in place is sensible. You don't really want it to scare everyone. You don't want it to scare it. It doesn't have to be terror. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It doesn't have to be intimidating. But of course, the truth is that I said at the beginning of the presentation that people don't like to be evaluated. People really don't like to be evaluated. And in a law firm, for example, the partners evaluate the associates every year, but no one evaluates the partner. No one generally evaluates the partners, or at least they do, but it's not. It's not there's not an ongoing process with feedback and the like, and that's why it's really difficult. You need to have that board leadership.
And I might just add, as a succession mistake would be, thinking that you're done. It's a constant process. It needs to be something that is always part of the board's normal annual process.
Great. The next question is, how do you suggest a board effectively recruit and locate members?
That is becoming a really a question that I'm here getting much more frequently, because you have a significant disadvantage attracting directors to a credit union, because you're saying to people, well, over the last 15 years, being a director of a federally insured credit union has become a much more rigorous process. You have to worry about things like, cybersecurity, money laundering, all of these different topics, and there's a lot more scrutiny too from the regulators. And then you say, well, okay, I can understand the risks. I might be willing to do it. Now, how much am I going to get for doing it? And of course, you have to say, well, as a director of a credit union, you don't get anything. You don't get anything in Massachusetts, and that's that'll turn some people off. But I think that you have to pay a lot of attention to your governance, and have people be able to go out and recruit people. You have to show them that you're a serious organization. It's not a bunch of people who sit around the table and talk about how the Red Sox blew the game last night. It's got to be, we're a serious organization. We're a serious organization. We have principles. We are there to serve our members and serve the community, and we are part of the most effective consumer business movements in the history of the United States, and that is true. But no one seems to understand. No one seems to understand that. And the better that you can tell the story, the easier it is, I think, to try to do that. Also, the more frequently you have these discussions internally about people that might be suitable candidates, you will come up with. You can keep a short list. Try to keep a short list of people that you might approach. It doesn't mean you have to go up and approach them now, but you say, well, if we have an opening, maybe this is a person. We've got a short list of 3 or 4 people that we should consider. You should start making your short list now.
Okay, and this is
because if you don't, you end up. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say, if you don't, you end up with that situation where you get people sitting around the table and they're just basically thinking off the top of their head. That's not a process. That's not a process.
So this is a good tie-in question, and actually our final question. When a credit union tries to recruit a new director, especially a professional like an attorney or an accountant, they're afraid of liability. How do you handle that issue, especially when a credit union can't pay them?
I think that, I don't know what Rob thinks. We'll ask Robert for his thoughts, but mine are that the likelihood of credit union directors getting sued, personally, is fairly remote. Is remote. The FDIC has been much more aggressive on the bank side, than the NCUA has been on the credit union side, and I think that's because the NCUA does understand that credit union directors are volunteers. They're not, the institutions themselves are a lot less complicated from a financial point of view than a large bank, and that the operating plan is a lot more, is simpler because the products are simpler. You're serving you're serving consumers. You're providing them basic, deposit and loan services, and that is, with when a credit union gets into trouble, the NCUA's posture is not to put the bank into the credit union into a receivership, the way the FDIC does with a bank. They put it in a receivership. A receivership means we shut the operation down, we take all the assets, we sell them to someone else, we collect them, and we collect the remaining assets, and we deal with the liabilities. And that's when they start looking around for people to sue. In the credit union world, the NCUA's preferred process is not to liquidate a troubled credit union, but to try to rehabilitate it. So they use a conservatorship where they may bring in people to run the credit union to, temporarily nurse it back to financial health. And you can, if you give it enough time, you can generally bring most of these institutions back. So I don't see that as a, as a huge, turnoff in terms of the liability exposure. And you also have directors and officers liability insurance, and the provision, bylaws should have provisions in there also that limit officer and director liability, to and authorize the credit union to procure that D&O insurance.
Yeah, I agree with everything Stan said. I guess I would add, I think that one of the ways in which you might be able to assure potential directors or candidates is, being transparent about the financial condition of the credit union. I think as an industry, credit unions are generally very well capitalized. If you look at instances where the FDIC has brought enforcement actions against individual directors, setting aside instances where someone, an individual, has acted in a obviously wrongful way, those actions generally are in the context of a bank that's failed or is financially distressed. And the FDIC has investigated that and determined that its view is that the cause of that is in part the director. And so I think being transparent about the good financial health of the credit union ought to help give some assurance to a candidate that for that reason and for all the reasons Stan mentioned, that the risk of any liability is very low.
Generally, you got a great story to tell, but credit unions haven't been as good as they might be, in terms of telling that story, telling that story. And I think every credit union should work to have its own presentation about what its role in the community or what its what its field of membership is, because you don't really see that, very often. At least I don't.
And that looks to be all for the questions. If anyone has any, please feel free. This would be the time to send them in. And if not, you can always contact me separately and I can get you in touch with Stan and Rob to answer any other questions you have. But Stan and Rob, thanks again so much for your time and your expertise. The topic of board succession is always of interest to our members. And this training is of great value to us, especially the forms and the documents that can be used internally for our members board. So we're very appreciative of your time and providing those resources. Everyone in attendance today will be emailed a copy of the presentation. You'll also receive the handouts, as Stan had mentioned, those that were reviewed during the session today, and I will email those out either later today or tomorrow. The recording of today's webinar will also be available early next week on our YouTube channel and on our website, and I will let you know as soon as the recording is available. And then lastly, mark your calendars. Next month's webinar presentation is going to take place on November 10th at 10 a.m. We're going to have a year-end economic update by leading analyst and University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, Professor Mike Goodman. In January, we have our annual meeting, our 60th annual meeting. That's on Friday the 28th. Meeting information and delegate registration information is going to be sent out next week. And lastly, looking into 2022, June 27th through the 29th is going to be MSIC's first in-person event in over 2 years. That's the MSIC Member Summit and 60th Anniversary Celebration. That's going to take place at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods. I've already sent out save the dates. Those have been circulated, email and hard copy, but you'll be seeing more detailed information, and we'll be opening registration in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out, mark your calendars. We do hope you'll join us. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad you could make it. And Stan and Rob, again, thank you so much.
Quite welcome. Thank you, Erica. Thanks a lot. So we disconnect.